And we brought this suit to challenge the HHS Secretary in a broad sense to stop him from a steady stream of actions that undermine vaccine access and vaccine confidence in the United States.
Welcome to Off the Chart, a business and medicine podcast featuring lively and informative conversations with healthcare experts, opinion leaders, and practicing physicians about the challenges facing doctors and medical practices. My name is Austin Luttrell. I'm the assistant editor over at Medical Economics, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Last week, a collection of major physician groups, including the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Physicians, the Society for Maternal-Fetal Medicine, along with an unnamed Jane Doe, filed a lawsuit against the Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They're looking to overturn his May directive removing the COVID-19 vaccine from the nation's immunization schedule for pregnant women and healthy children between the ages of 6 months and 17 years. In this week's episode, we're taking a deep dive into that lawsuit, as Medical Economics senior editor Richard Perriton is joined by Richard H. Hughes, an attorney representing the plaintiffs in the lawsuit against HHS. He also serves as a voting director for the nonprofit vaccine advocacy organization Vaccinate Your Family. Thank you to Richard for joining us this week, and with that, let's get into the episode.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Real good. And yourself?
Good, good.
Excellent. Thank you for taking the time.
Of course. Yeah, happy to.
Excellent. You represent a group of healthcare organizations that have filed a lawsuit against the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Can you give an overview of that situation?
Yes, happy to. So we filed a lawsuit yesterday on behalf of the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Physicians, the Society for Maternal-Fetal Medicine, and other groups, including a Jane Doe plaintiff who's a pregnant woman who believes that she will have difficulty accessing the COVID vaccine if she wants to protect herself and her unborn child. And we brought this suit to challenge the HHS Secretary in a broad sense to stop him from a steady stream of actions that undermine vaccine access and vaccine confidence in the United States. And then in a specific sense, so that we could bring the legal claims that we need to bring, focused really on the final agency action in the form of the video that he produced with Marty Makary and Jay Bhattacharya. And that was the video where they announced that they were rescinding the COVID vaccine recommendations. And so basically that prevents many people from having access to vaccines, to COVID vaccines, and that's the action that that we're challenging specifically.
And in full disclosure, I always tell people I'm not a physician, so if I ask a silly question,
I'm not either.
I
Yeah,
appreciate your patience.
yeah,
But you know what? And this has been one thing that I've been kind of curious about, because when we talk about a recommendation, perhaps it's not as strong a language as some people might want. And I guess, can you talk a little bit more about that whole notion of the recommendation and how it affects access?
sure. So it's important for many reasons. So first of all, it's used in clinical practice as a standard of care. Professional societies have their guidelines, but this is really a recommendation that has been considered by a whole body of experts across different uh, disciplines and specialty areas of practice, and really in consideration of the harmonization of various recommendations. And so clinical practice is one area, and then you actually have various policies and laws that do rely on ACIP recommendations, whether that's pharmacist scope of practice laws or the requirement under the ACA that coverage, be tied to ACIP recommendations and that patients receive vaccines with zero out-of-pocket cost. So there's a lot of access that's determined through these recommendations. ACIP recommendations are not mandatory, and I think that's something that is often confused. Is that they're sort of mandatory, and that's simply not the case. They are recommendations. Many states will then use those recommendations to actually implement uh, requirements for, say, like school entry or that certain healthcare professionals, should be immunized.
Say, Keith, this is all well and good, but what if someone is looking for more clinical information?
Oh, then they want to check out our sister site, PatientCareOnline.com, the leading clinical resource for primary care physicians. Again, that's PatientCareOnline.com.
Wanted to definitely ask about with your clients, the client organizations that have brought this case, how do they believe the directive, or perhaps the lack of a recommendation or directive, how will that affect public health, particularly for pregnant women and children?
Yeah, so it really does complicate the ability of providers to practice according to the standard of care because it create certainly patient doubts. Patients have a lot of conversations, and it makes it, or excuse me, patients have a lot of questions. It makes it really difficult to counsel patients effectively, and it takes up, a lot of time in clinic to have to spend counseling patients. And then, given the issues around coverage and payment, the uncertainty that a vaccine will be covered can certainly discourage patients, can discourage providers from offering it. So there's a real, concern that this is just all around something that makes practice really complicated.
Regarding the secretary and his directive, for the COVID-19 vaccine, do you believe that they have been relying on established scientific evidence in making that directive or decision?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think that they gave a lot of thought at all to the actual evidence or gave it, a hard look, as we say, under administrative procedure law. I think that what they did was engaged in a decision that reflects a lot of bias, against vaccines and in particular against COVID vaccines. And so I don't think they considered a lot of the access issues in the United States for vaccines. I think that, by overturning the recommendation, they really did not consider the fact that a lot of people might not have access because of the issues that I just described. And they also, really ran roughshod over a lot of processes and procedures that are normally undertaken, as the ACIP applies its evidence to recommendation framework, as it, really goes through the process of discussing, considering the evidence in order to formulate its recommendations, which the director of the CDC, ultimately the secretary, have the authority to reject or approve. But none of that process happened in this case.
And one of the things that I also noted in the complaint was that it described some of the recent actions surrounding members of the ACIP. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of their deliberations, some of the members? Are they going to get a chance to advise the secretary on the directive?
Um, yeah, so they will likely move on to other vaccines that I believe will become a target of the secretary and the new committee. And so, will they continue to revise COVID recommendations in the future? I could see that as a possibility, but I think they have their sights set on other specific vaccines at this time.
Can you name names?
Sure. I mean, they obviously at the last meeting they voted to no longer recommend thimerosal-containing flu vaccines, which was a vaccine containing the preservative thimerosal, so that multi-dose vials could remain shelf stable. They looked at the measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella combination vaccine. Basically revisiting evidence that was looked at 15 years ago by the ACIP in considering the safety of those combination vaccines. And so, I think that what we're going to see and what's really been indicated directly by the chair of the ACIP, but also by the secretary, is that they will wholesale reevaluate the childhood immunization schedule.
Okay. And then to go back to the lawsuit, if I may, because one of the things you had mentioned earlier in our conversation was some of the different medical organizations and professional groups. They're made up of doctors, and they can advise each other, frankly, on they can do research and advise each other on various medical treatments and technology. I mean, and not just vaccines, but all kinds of stuff. And where I'm going with this one is Why is legal action necessary when you do have some of the medical organizations who, for example, the American Academy of Pediatrics, I think a lot of parents say, wow, if this group of doctors who treat children specifically, if they say this is a good thing, I believe them.
Sure. And I think it is important right now more than ever that we look to professional societies for those guidelines. The ACIP really began its work to help simplify the immunization schedule because we were seeing new vaccines at the time, lots of new vaccines come out. And we have seen additional vaccines developed since then. There's a lot of evidence that really does need to be reviewed and digested. And we're looking at immunization across the lifespan and policies that, again, rely back on the ACIP. And so it's really important that we have a central body that is being, looked to as we try to determine the standard of care for immunization holistically across the lifespan.
And as far as you know, do you think those medical organizations will continue to make their recommendations?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I don't think there's any question about that. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Oh, you say you're a practice leader or administrator? We've got just the thing. Our sister site, Physicians.Practice.com, your one-stop shop for all the expert tips and tricks that will get your practice really humming. Again, that's Physicians.Practice.com.
Not everybody is always familiar with some of the ins and outs of legal procedures. And can you explain a little bit about, actually at the courthouse door, so to speak, what has to happen next?
Yeah, so we are requesting a hearing for a preliminary injunction consolidated with an evidentiary hearing as we seek our permanent injunction. So what we hope for is a hearing within the next few weeks, and then potentially a decision by mid-September.
And based on the timing, again, not to belabor the point, but I can remember from my days covering courthouses sort of at the local level, because the legal process does take time, there's, legal notifications, people have deadlines in which to respond. Where I'm going with this is, you mentioned about a ruling by September. Do you think that court action can take place quickly enough to make a difference in the upcoming respiratory and flu season?
That remains to be seen. The season tends to run, hit or miss through early spring. And so I think that there certainly is some time. Will it happen ahead of the season? The season starts in August. And so we'll just have to see how the timing plays out.
I always like to ask this question. Our main audience is primary care physicians. What would you like to say to them, or what would you like them to know, either in general or about the case specifically?
Yeah. So I think it's important more than ever that because of the state of affairs that we're in, is that we double down on professional society guidelines and talking with patients about what's in those guidelines, why vaccines are important, and really clarifying that there is a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there, and that there's an effort, that we're undertaking to really put a stop to this. And that's what our lawsuit is about.
Excellent. Well, I'll tell you what, I think, like I said, I think that's a really good introduction for the moment. If I have questions, I'll reach out by email here, but I do appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks so much. I'm glad you reached out, Richard.
Oh, absolutely. You know what? Have a good rest of the day here. And in all seriousness, please do keep in touch. Hopefully we'll be again real soon.
Absolutely. Likewise. All right.
Thanks.
Talk soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Once again, you just heard from Richard H. Hughes, an attorney representing the plaintiffs in the lawsuit against HHS and a voting director for the nonprofit vaccine advocacy organization Vaccinate Your Family. My name is Austin Luttrell, and on behalf of the whole medical economics and physicians practice teams, I'd like to thank you for listening to the show and ask that you please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss the next episode. Also, if you'd like the best stories that medical economics and physicians practice publish delivered straight to your email 6 days of the week, subscribe to our newsletters at medicaleconomics.com and physicianspractice.com. Off the Chart, a business and medicine podcast, is executive produced by Chris Mazzolini and Keith Reynolds and produced by Austin Luttrell. Medical Economics, Physicians Practice, and Patient Care Online are all members of the MJH Life Sciences family. Thank you.